This is Sybert signing into Tournament Rift for Semifinal B of Ladder Season 3. We have got another best of 3 on our hands. The other best of 3 should be up. We are taking a trip down memory lane for sure with this series, spawning as the green black hand on the left side. This is Dynamic. Is going to be smurfing, as I think gives you hell in this particular game, while on the right side as the pink GDI, this is Ironhide. A player that I'm not too familiar with. I was actually taking a look through the Ladder Season 3 graphics just before this, and some players that I wouldn't really have expected were actually in the round of 32 for the Ladder Season 3, so kind of an interesting just look back in time. Lots of players playing Black Hand and GDI, so that hasn't really changed in recent times. Oh, those Rifleman squads going to be getting absolutely trashed. Not even killing a single Black Hand squad, as Dynamic definitely wins the scouting war in this particular case. One bike coming on out, and I'm actually surprised to see just the one bike. We'll actually see. I mean, it looks like he's following it up with a Harvester, which, the single bike scout, a classic, as you know. And in this particular case, Ironhide going to be dropping the foxhole in the middle of his opponent's base. He's like, all right, you going to refineries. It's not a second war factory, anything crazy like that. The first bike going to be showing up. Of course, it's not quite as long-lasting in most cases as a single buggy would be, but it does give you that nice damage output potential. And in most cases, I feel like most players just go for the buggy scout rather than the bike scout. Naturally, I always want to shoot the ground just in case, because likely just a little bit of a misclick there. No one quite going for the southern spikes just yet. Of course, Unleashed is not playing in the series, so he's not trying to take all 4 spikes or anything like that. Dynamic moving directly for the center field. It looks like he has dropped all 3 of his power plants, so he's going to be able to keep himself online while he moves his MCV. More bikes going to be coming out, and of course, Ironhide will have a pretty good idea of what his opponent is going for. He scouted out the MCV with the Pitbull. He's even trying to mess up the MCV pathing a little bit there with that Pitbull. A little bit of damage, not anything really to worry about for Ironhide. Ironhide does actually need to worry about these really annoying Black Hand squads. The Cabals, of course, have pretty good damage output for being Tier 1 anti-infantry. But, of course, if they get upgraded with that Black Disciple upgrade, they suddenly become a lot more powerful. Second War Factory getting dropped down by Dynamic, potentially just to put on a lot of pressure. We'll have to see if he actually decides to eco up this field immediately after this, or if he just wants to put on a lot of pressure and try to get something done with bikes. Expanding south is Ironhide. He's no scrub, though. He's going to be at least pulling down some units for the defense. And these Harvesters, well, they may have needed to be pulled back a little bit further, but in this case, the Pitbulls do show up in time. 5 Pitbulls do have pretty good trading abilities with that few bikes. It's not an overwhelming number of bikes just yet. It might be once they join up in the north. They're going to be pushing in, get a couple of shots off on these Harvesters, and with almost a nearly like 180-degree surround on this one Harvester, they're going to be able to clean it up without too much trouble. He's gotten this other Harvester pretty darn low, and he's going to have to sacrifice the majority of these bikes, as there are a fair few Pitbulls here to take them down, but sniping down 2 Harvesters when there's still half a field of Tiberium is definitely nice, although I don't know that it's actually cost-effective at this point. Over time, it probably will be cost-effective just because those Harvesters are infinitely off the line. They're off the line eternally, so to speak, although rebuilding them won't be the hardest thing for Ironhide. Dynamic has established himself, at least economically, on this center field. Does eventually need to drop down that second refinery just to take advantage of all the money that is waiting here. And there is going to be that second refinery right there. Pitbulls coming in kind of through the middle of the map are going to be meeting up with these bikes. Some massive overkill of that one bike there. Definitely more rockets than are necessary to actually kill the targets going into them. Rocket Squad's getting a couple of shots off there, as it is just going to be the single racks production, not dual racks or anything like that. But these pit bulls going to be getting sniped down. These last few bikes will be able to deal with them with the help of the Kamal squad. Shouldn't lose too many more bikes. And goodbye, pit bull. It finally does go down. And wow, this Tib Spike is actually just going to be killed by a non-black disciple Cabal squad inside of that structure. Unfortunately, Ironhide never really able to get his economy rolling in the southern field. He's just been kind of focused on defending, and Dynamic not really allowing him to get that up and rolling, which of course, if you let that GDI economy get up and saturated, they can be definitely a tough nut to crack if they decide to turtle really hard. Finally going to be bringing out some Shatterers. The problem with just bringing out Shatterers is they're not necessarily very long for this world if they don't have something else to help them out. In this particular case, the Watchtower eventually going to be helping to push back those rocket squads. And as long as the Shatterers can get off their wonderful splash damage shots, they can do some really good cleanup work on some Black Hand infantry man spam. This Tib Spike, wow, Dynamic actually getting some really good value out of those Cabal squads, which initially were just kind of for scouting and for shutting down the scouting units of his opponents. Well, I mean, a fair number of these rocket squads are going to be getting cleaned up by these Shatterer tanks. I don't know that it's actually enough to justify losing all of those Shatterer tanks right on the front lines there, because you may actually need those tanks for the defense in a couple of moments. MCV potentially just about to plop down a second refinery in the south. Could also be going for tier 3, but it is not so. Wow, he is armored up with those non-AP ammo watchtowers. I mean, that's the sort of funny thing, is that he's invested so much into the watchtowers, but he actually hasn't invested into AP ammo, which is considered pretty darn important anytime you are playing up against a Black Hand opponent. I mean, when you're playing anyone, AP ammo just makes those watchtowers so much more effective in dealing with harass, especially light harass coming out from bikes. These two pit bulls are going to be killed if they stick around, and they trade out for, it looks like, just the one bike. A little bit unfortunate there, but if the watchtowers were still around, they would definitely help defend, as Dynamic going to be moving in here. He can snipe down both of these harvesters if he wants to. Gets two harvesters, may actually get the Orca as well, as the Orca just sticks around trying to clean up these bikes. And the last couple of bikes should end up going down to the forces here of Ironhide in the north. More Shadow Tanks going to be moving out, but again, they're just taking a lot of damage. They will be able to do some nice splash damage, not super high-value targets that they're eliminating, as more and more rocket squads going to be showing up, and Dynamic running circles around these Shadow Tanks. That was actually a really nice shot. Cleaned up like 5 rocket squads right there, or something like that. Dynamic also going to be trying to take the blue Tib field. Not quite going to be doing it without any opposition, as Ironhide rolls in here with his pit bulls, is going to be able to claim one of the harvesters, which certainly is annoying, but the remaining rocket squads will be able to deal with the pit bulls without too much trouble. Watchtowers in the north and the Orca going to be trying to deal with these attack bikes. And actually, well, I don't know how many attack bikes that Orca actually killed. It may not have actually been worth it for Ironhide to mount the defense using the Orcas. He doesn't have a whole lot of units. He's definitely in desperation mode when you're trying to fight off ground units, anti-air ground units with your aircraft. Yeah, that's typically not a good sign. But Dynamic has been doing a pretty good job of keeping up the pressure. Ironhide has been defending relatively well, but not necessarily as well as he actually needs to. Dynamic now going to be expanding on backwards, is going to take kind of his quote-unquote natural expansion after taking much of the center field and also the blue Tiberium in the south. He definitely does have a lot of economy going to be coming in. With 3 refineries on the front line, you'd think he'd have more than pretty much just those 3 harvesters. As that was actually a nice Orca strike coming in from Ironhide. It was kind of an unsafe one, or a risky Orca strike to actually call in. Dynamic capturing both of the spikes in the south a little while ago. And one Orca ends up going down. The other Orca is actually going to be hunting for harvesters, as they're going to be going for the prize. They will be able to clean... No, the second rocket didn't actually impact on that harvester, and now the Orca is just taking a lot of damage from these bikes. A second Orca does go down, while in the south, not a whole lot is actually happening. Probably just infantry standing inside of Tiberium fields. And these Orcas, no, the rockets will not impact from the bikes. The Orcas will manage to escape. They will live for now, as more Pred tanks finally coming out onto the field. APCs, still no AP ammo against a Black Hand player. Very surprising. Could be just one of those things that he ends up forgetting, as it is most likely on the way now. I guess he could actually be getting whatever else, the, like, sensor pods and scanner packs, which would be kind of surprising if those were the upgrades he was going for, again, considering just how good AP ammo is in general. A couple of rocket squads going to be standing on the Tiberium, not necessarily a great idea. Dynamic now going to be moving in the north and the south, hitting 2 places at once. Really going to be pushing Ironhide to the absolute limits, as Ironhide's Orcas do fall without hardly getting any actual value kills. Killing the bikes in the north is not actually stopping the brunt of the DPS from the army, which is, of course, in mostly the man spam, both in the north and in the south. AP ammo still somehow not actually finished, as it's, I'm assuming, just moments away, and this will make the defense a whole lot easier, although crushing a lot of rocket squads also makes the defense considerably easier for Ironhide, as he is able to hold off in the south. AP ammo now going to be kicking in just for the latter half of that battle. All of the infrastructure, 2 war factories in the north, and I think a refinery or something like that, as well as a power plant or 2 in the north, all getting completely cleaned up. Body with seemingly infinite money is actually named Dynamic in this particular game, and of course, Technique vs. Vani is the other semifinal, which I just ended up casting, but in this case, Dynamic just has almost infinite money, considering he's sitting on that basically 2 base saturation, or almost 2 base saturation. Blue tip in the middle, and Ironhide has been defeated. Dynamic with so much money, pumping out so many units to conquer his opponent with, and I'm actually curious about that resource graph. So for the first 3 minutes of the game, Ironhide doing a pretty good job keeping up, but then, wow, 3,000 credits per minute, almost a difference between these 2 players. 30,000 credits is a reasonable difference when we're talking about really just about 7 or 8 minutes, because yeah, the game length was about 12 minutes, but really that's where the difference is actually pronounced. Ironhide not able to keep up with Dynamic in game number 1. Now this is a best of 3, so Ironhide needs to kick it up into another gear if he wants to make it through this bracket and advance on to the finals. But will he be able to do it? It all starts with a comeback in game number 2, which takes us to tournament decision. And spawning in the bottom left-hand corner, playing as the pink Reaper 17. This is Ironhide. Currently down 0-1 in this series, while as the orange Skrin in the top right-hand corner. This is Dynamic. Reaper 17 versus Skrin. Kind of a stark contrast to Black Hand versus GDI. Definitely 2 factions that we see a whole lot less. Reaper 17, not necessarily, actually maybe it was played a lot more back in the day. It's definitely one of the less common factions. Wow. Dynamic actually able to get a couple of extra kills with his buzzer squad before finally being taken out. Snipes down the extra buzzer squad from Ironhide. Very well played there by Dynamic. Oh, Dynamic actually gets the kill on one of the engineers of his opponent. And Ironhide may have done the exact same. We may have actually had a kill for a kill in that particular case. Ironhide does have a buzzer squad kind of moving out in the north, and definitely a nice job by both players if they were actually able to kill off the engineers of their opponents, sniping down that 500 credit investment, especially when a player is actually expecting to get it in this particular case. And of course, Ironhide with his Reaper 17 shielded harvesters will be able to take those extra couple of shots. Personally, I'm really interested in seeing how 2 players from this time are going to play out a Skrin matchup on tournament decision. I'm actually kind of curious if it'll vary all that much from Skrin play of today, although a lot of times when you see a Skrin faction being played, it is indeed someone playing Traveler 59, which these days does involve a lot of descent openers, so definitely not seeing that from these guys, as they are indeed going to be going for completely different openers. Well, they're going for relatively similar openers, but different than, you know, mass amounts of descents. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see these guys one base tech up to something potentially mechapedes, but when you can drop down 3 refineries, when you can get up 7 harvesters to saturate those refineries all on one base, it is not at all surprising to see guys pump up towards that tier 3 and just sit on this one base economy for a little bit longer than they otherwise would on a map with a smaller Tiberium field to start with. Gunwalker and Seeker Tank's going to be popping on out for Dynamic. He is, of course, going to be wanting to snipe down those buzzers when and where he can. While the choice, I'm actually kind of curious. Okay, there is indeed the Tier 2, which does mean we are going to see ourselves some dev tanks. Again, not at all surprising for a Reaper 17 player to be going for dev tanks. Wow, we're actually seeing... Do we have growth? No, just a growth accelerator from Dynamic. Again, not something you really see very often. Most players consider that growth accelerators are not really worth it. The Reaper 17 one, in long games, I mean, it can be worth it, but at the point in the game where you would necessarily be getting that, you'd typically rather spend that money that you're investing there for, like, you know, a 10 or a 15-minute payoff. You'd rather be spending that money either on your tech or on units, something like that. Ironhide going to be walking up here. He's like, all right, you're up to Tier 3. I know that now. I'm up to Tier 3 myself. Again, not a surprise to see these guys one base teching. Ichor Seed going to be activated there. And, oh, going to be sniping down that buzzer squad once again. And there's actually going to be the Warp Chasm coming up, the first epic unit of this series. And interestingly enough, going to be expanding with the Outpost. Of course, in this particular case, it makes a lot of sense just because Dynamic wanted to get his expansion, or at least his build radius, up relatively quickly, and at the same time, he didn't want to delay his Warp Chasm, delay his tech from going down. So now he can, of course, immediately start into that refinery, or start relatively soon that refinery, to try to get his economy up and running. And there's actually going to be the stasis chamber, so I'm assuming the mastermind has now started for Dynamic. This is actually going to be double Reaper tripod production coming out from Ironhide. He is elected, well, what's the next structure coming out? No, it is going to be the stasis chamber. So instead of going for a Warp Chasm, which he should know that his opponent does have at this point, he is elected to go for Reaper tripods, which are pretty darn powerful in comparison. And wow, Dynamic may actually be going for... he's not actually put the descent into the Eradicator Hexapod just yet. Sometimes you see players go for Shock Troopers inside of the Eradicator Hexapod. They do give it the anti-air. They do have a little bit more range than the descents, and they do kind of provide that extra utility, but descents technically have more DPS, at least when inside of the Eradicator Hexapod, and I think also as long as you're on the ground. I mean, obviously they can't shoot up, so they have less DPS in that sense, but as long as you get up close and personal with your opponent, as long as the descents are actually able to fire their weapons, they do indeed do that extra damage. Engineers being sent out, one of them may be split off for this tip spike, but they probably are just for those relatively fast Husk captures on the front lines. Anytime you're going up against an Eradicator Hexapod, Husk recapturing can be very important. There's going to be the first refinery, of course, going down. Got the second harvester already over there and waiting. Keeping that economy going is going to be very important. And there is going to be the stasis chamber locking down 2 tripods, and it looks like a descent as up come the Reaper tripods. They're actually going to be kind of torn apart, potentially piecemeal. Now the Eradicator Hexapod is back online. He can actually get into this fight, as he is going to be getting EMP'd right there. The Mastermind stepping forward, grabbing one of the tripods, not quite going to be getting sniped by their Buzzer Swarm support power, as they do miss the opportunity to snipe down that Mastermind, trying to go for the run. But there's the teleport forward, blinking on top of those tripods and immediately being EMP'd. Not to mention Dynamic also going to be losing this Storm Column, which is being locked down once again by those Reaper tripods. If they don't actually get the re-crush and the re-EMP of that Eradicator Hexpod, it will potentially be able to go for the crush. Somehow, some way, Dynamic may actually be losing this Eradicator Hexpod before actually getting pretty much even a kill. I don't even know if he technically got a kill with the Eradicator Hexpod. He may have only killed pretty much like one tripod, and now the Mastermind has captured the last remaining Reaper tripod. That attack, as good as it almost was, didn't actually do very much. He traded out pretty much his entire army, and, well, I guess the cost is going to be in the engineers that have to walk over here and recapture these tripods. So the Annihilator tripod's definitely going to be annoying. A couple of Storm Columns may have also gone down, but the real probably value or money sink was in that Eradicator Hexpod. Sniping that down, yeah, it's nice, but unless your follow-up attack is actually going to be hitting before the second Eradicator Hexpod is out, which, I mean, it probably won't be, then I'm not sure that that attack was actually, all things considered, really worth it. Devastator Warship, of course, going to be joining the fray for Dynamic. Ironhide going to be moving in the south, is going to be stepping forward with his Shard Walkers. Doesn't have blue shards, at least not just yet. They could potentially be researching. A little bit of a battle marker on the left side of the map, not exactly sure what for. Extractor going to be getting targeted down. This refinery would be nice to keep alive. It has probably paid for itself at this point, considering it has been harvesting away and refining that Tiberium for a little while. Annihilator tripod's going to be stepping forward as the Reaper tripods from Ironhide going to be potentially finishing off that refinery very nicely there, and now they're going to be forced to kill their brethren, as it is still mind-controlled by that Mastermind. He does get shut down, but of course it's going to be at the expense of trading away these other Reaper tripods against the numbers that Dynamic has. Ironhide just cannot hold up in this particular battle, loses a third tripod, and a Storm Rider even shows up for Dynamic. He does have that going for him. Shields back online as they snipe down all three of the Shard Walkers. And does Ironhide really have anything? He does have 3 Reaper tripods. Is that actually all that he's got at this point? That may be it, which means standing against the 4 tripods and the Eradicator Hexpod is going to be a little bit difficult here for Ironhide, as he's continuing to lose his units pretty much one at a time. He didn't even get an opportunity to force them into an engagement altogether. They're just kind of spread out over time. Ironhide has been defeated, and Dynamic with the 2-0 will step forward into the finals. And of course, the other semifinals should already be up, so you should already have watched that. But if you didn't, you can of course always give that a look. But Gives You Hell, aka Dynamic, will be moving on to the finals of Ladder Season 3. Of course, that is going to be the final best of 3 from this tournament that I will be casting. And it is definitely fun to see these games straight up to the late game, straight up to Tier 3 for both of these guys pretty much. If you think about it, not a lot of action before that, and then just tripod v tripod. Mix in a little Eradicator Hexpod, mix in a little bit of Mastermind, and that was that game on decision. With the 2-0, Dynamic steps up to the plate. Will he be able to take the finals? We will be finding out in the next video. Of course, that's going to be coming up relatively soon. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and this is Sybert signing out.